Where are you watching from today? Drop your city and state in the comments. I love knowing who's here with me. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old, living in a pale yellow house on Birchwood Lane in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. I had a husband named Daniel, a vegetable garden I was proud of, and a mother I called every Sunday morning without fail. I thought I knew what my life was. I was wrong about almost all of it. It started at my mother's second wedding. She had met a man named Gerald 2 years after my father passed. Gerald was kind, soft-spoken, drove a sensible sedan, and brought her tulips every Friday. I liked him. My husband liked him. Everyone liked Gerald. The wedding was small, maybe 40 people in the backyard of Gerald's sister's home in Worthington. String lights, a jazz trio, a 3-tiered lemon cake. I was the maid of honor. I had given a toast that made my mother cry the good kind of tears. I was standing near the gift table, still holding my champagne glass, when the caterer walked up to me. She was a woman I had never seen before. Late 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, wearing the standard black uniform of the catering staff. She leaned close to me, like she was asking if I needed a refill. She said, "You're Claire Merritt, Daniel's wife." I said yes, a little confused, assuming she knew someone who knew us. She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. Her eyes didn't smile when she said it. "Don't open that until you're alone, and don't tell your husband I gave it to you." Then she walked away, and I never saw her near me again for the rest of the night. I stood there holding that folded paper for 45 minutes before I could find a reason to excuse myself. I told Daniel I needed some air, slipped into the powder room off the hallway, locked the door, and opened it. It was a photograph, printed on plain copy paper, slightly blurry, the way a screenshot looks when you zoom in too far. It showed a woman and a man sitting at a restaurant table. They were laughing. His hand was on hers. The man was Daniel. I recognized his profile immediately. The slight forward tilt he always had when he was happy. His left hand, the one with the small scar across the knuckle from a woodworking accident he told me about on our third date. The woman I didn't recognize. Beneath the photograph, written in blue pen, "She isn't the first. Ask him about Portland." I folded the paper back up. I put it inside my bra, against my ribs. I unlocked the door, walked back out to the reception, found my husband standing by the bar with a beer in his hand, laughing at something Gerald said. I smiled at him. I touched his arm. I stayed until the last guest left and helped my mother bustle her dress so she could dance. I did not say a word. That night, lying next to Daniel in the dark of the guest room at Gerald's sister's house, I listened to him breathe, and I tried to remember everything. Portland. Daniel had been to Portland twice in the past year and a half. Both times for work, he was a regional sales manager for a medical device company. Both times I had dropped him off at the airport and picked him up again, kissed him at the arrivals terminal, asked him how the flights were. Both times he had brought me back something small. A candle the first time, a bag of Stumptown coffee the second. I had put the candle on our bathroom shelf. I had made the coffee on a Sunday morning and called my mother. I lay there in the dark and I thought, what if none of it was what I thought? I did not sleep. The next morning, I told Daniel I was going to stay an extra day to help my mother settle in. He kissed my forehead, shook Gerald's hand, and drove back to Columbus alone. The moment his car turned off the street, I took the photograph out of my purse, and I looked at it again for a long time. Then I called my best friend, Renata. Renata had known me since college. She was practical in the way I needed right then, not the kind of friend who screams and spirals with you, but the kind who immediately asks what you need and starts moving. I read her the note over the phone. I described the photo. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Forward me the photo. Don't confront him yet. Let me make some calls." Renata worked in HR for a large law firm in Columbus. She knew people. I didn't ask which people. I forwarded her the photo, and I spent the rest of the day helping my mother arrange her new kitchen, smiling, pretending everything was fine, dying slowly on the inside. Renata called me back that evening. She said, "The woman in the photo is named Trisha. She lives in Portland. She has an Instagram that's half private. I found 3 photos where you can see Daniel in the background. The oldest one is dated 14 months ago. 14 months ago, Daniel and I had just celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary. I had made reservations at the Italian restaurant where we had our first date. He had given me a necklace with a small pearl pendant that I still wore almost every day. I took the necklace off that night and put it in the zippered pocket of my suitcase. When I got home to Columbus the next day, I walked through my front door, set my bag down, and looked at the house I had built with this man. The framed photos on the staircase wall, the shared bookshelf in the living room where his novels and my novels leaned against each other, the kitchen where I had cooked dinner for him approximately 900 times. Daniel came downstairs and hugged me and said he missed me and asked if I was hungry. I said I was fine and went upstairs to shower. I stood under the hot water and made a decision. I was not going to confront him yet. I was going to find out everything first, all of it, every layer, because the photograph and the note had not felt like a coincidence or a misunderstanding. They had felt like a warning, and warnings implied something larger than one dinner in Portland. Ask him about Portland. Not ask him about her. Ask him about Portland, the city, as if Portland itself was the secret. Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I started paying attention to his phone differently. Not going through it, I couldn't bring myself to touch it, but noticing. Noticing when he angled it away from me. Noticing when he stepped out of the room to take calls. Noticing that he had started keeping it face down on surfaces where he used to leave it face up. I started noticing the money. Daniel handled our joint finances because I had always found the administrative side of life tedious, and he had always seemed to enjoy it. I had trusted him completely. I realized, sitting at his desk while he was in the shower one evening, that I had not actually looked at our joint account in over a year. I had just watched the balance and assumed. I logged in. I sat there for a very long time. Over the past 18 months, there were regular transfers out of our joint savings, never a large amount at once. 300 here, 500 there, twice a month, sometimes 3 times, always to an account I didn't recognize. Always on days that I later traced back, using his old travel receipts still in the filing cabinet to dates around his Portland trips. The total, when I added it up, was just over $31,000. I closed the laptop very carefully, and I went and sat in the vegetable garden in the dark until I could breathe normally. I called Renata the next morning. I told her about the money. She was quiet again. Then she said, "Claire, I need you to listen to me carefully. I don't think this is just about a woman in Portland. I think you need to talk to someone who can look into this properly." She meant a private investigator. She had a name. A woman named Diane, former law enforcement, worked mostly domestic cases in the Columbus area. Renata had used her once for something work-related and trusted her. I called Diane that afternoon. We met at a coffee shop on High Street. She was in her mid-40s, unremarkable to look at, which I suspected was professionally useful. She listened to me lay everything out, the caterer, the photograph, the note, Portland, the transfers, without writing anything down. When I finished, she nodded slowly. She said, "The transfers concern me more than the affair. $31,000 in small increments is a specific behavior pattern. That's not someone spending money on a girlfriend. That's someone moving money deliberately." I asked her what she thought it meant. She said she didn't want to speculate until she had more information. She told me to keep acting completely normal. She said that was the most important thing. She said, "Whatever you do, don't let him know you're looking." I drove home and made dinner. Daniel sat across from me and talked about a conference call he'd had that afternoon and asked if I wanted to watch something after dinner. I said sure. What did he want to watch? He said I could pick. I picked a documentary about national parks. We watched it on the couch with a bowl of popcorn between us, and I kept thinking, I don't know who you are. I have been sleeping next to a stranger. Diane came back to me 10 days later. We met in her car in the parking lot of a library branch on the east side. She pulled up photos on a tablet and walked me through them calmly, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. Professional, clear, no unnecessary softness. Daniel did have a second life in Portland. Trisha was not a girlfriend. She was the mother of his daughter, a little girl named Maisie, 2 years old in the most recent photo Diane had found. Daniel's daughter, a child I had never heard him mention. A child who existed while we were married, while he was bringing me coffee and necklaces and asking what I wanted to watch. I stared at the photo of Maisie for a long time. She had his nose. I had always thought I would love having a child with his nose. Diane said, "There's more." The money was not for Trisha. Trisha appeared to be unaware of me and believed she and Daniel were simply on a slower track toward commitment. The money, the $31,000, had been going to a separate account under a different name. Diane had traced the name. She laid her tablet on the center console and showed me. The account belonged to a woman named Carolyn Reese in Phoenix, Arizona, 47 years old. Diane had found a civil court record from 7 years ago, a restraining order. Daniel, listed under his full name, Daniel Edward Merritt, had filed it against Carolyn Reese and been granted it. For harassment, for stalking, for making threats of disclosure. Disclosure of what? The court record did not specify, but Diane had kept looking. She said, "I think someone has been blackmailing your husband for a long time, Claire, and I think whatever they have on him, it's bigger than a second family." I asked her if she knew what it was. She hesitated. She said, "I made contact with someone, a source from when I was in law enforcement. I showed him what I had. He told me to be very careful. He told me Daniel's name has appeared in a financial investigation that's been open for 4 years." She let that sit. I said, "What kind of investigation?" She looked at me and said, "Federal." I drove home on autopilot. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes. Then I went inside and I made dinner again, and I watched Daniel eat it across the table from me, and I thought about Maisie with his nose, and $31,000, and a federal investigation, and a caterer at my mother's wedding who had known exactly who I was. That night I lay awake again and I thought about the note. The caterer had not said your husband is cheating on you. She had said ask him about Portland and given me just enough to start pulling. She had pointed me toward a thread, knowing I would pull it, knowing what was attached to the other end. Who was she? How did she know me? How did she know Daniel? How did she know I would be at my mother's wedding? I called Renata at 6 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I need to know who that caterer was." It took Renata 4 days. She worked backward from the catering company my mother had hired, called under the pretense of wanting to book them for an event, asked to confirm the staff who had worked the Worthington date, said one of her guests had mentioned a server by name, and she wanted to leave a personal tip. The company gave her a name, Margaret Osley. Renata texted me the name with nothing else. I sat with it for a day, not knowing what to do with it. Then Diane called me. She said, "A federal agent contacted me this morning. I think they've been watching you since you started looking. They want to meet with you." I said, "Are you serious?" She said, "Claire, whatever you're feeling right now, I need you to think clearly. This is actually a good thing. If they're coming to you, it means they believe you're not involved. It means they may want your help." I met with 2 agents the following Tuesday. Not at a field office in the back room of a dry cleaning business on the west side that I later realized the FBI apparently used sometimes for exactly this kind of meeting. The agents were a man and a woman. They were polite. They offered me water. They told me that Daniel's company had been used to route payments for a medical equipment fraud scheme running through 3 states. That Daniel was not the architect of it. He had been recruited 6 years ago and had been too afraid to get out. That the blackmail from Carolyn Reese had started when she figured out what he was doing and decided extracting money was more profitable than reporting it. They told me that Margaret Osley, the caterer, was an informant who had been connected to the case through a separate thread. That she had been watching Daniel for over a year and had identified me as an unknowing spouse who might become a cooperative witness if pointed in the right direction. They were right. I sat in that back room and I thought about who I had been 3 months ago. A woman with a vegetable garden and a pearl necklace and 900 dinners. A woman who called her mother every Sunday and thought she knew what her life was. I said, "What do you need from me?" They needed access. They needed me to continue acting normally for a specific period of time. They needed me to let them place a small recording device in our home with my legal consent to capture conversations they needed for the case. They were very clear. I would be safe. There would be surveillance. The moment any interaction posed a risk to me, they would intervene. They also told me something I hadn't asked. Daniel had been trying to get out of the scheme for over a year. He had contacted an attorney. He had been in quiet conversations with the fraud unit. He was, in the technical language the agent used, a cooperating subject. Not fully turned yet, still frightened, still being blackmailed, but moving in a direction. I asked if he knew I knew. They said no. and they asked me to keep it that way for a little longer. I drove home. Daniel was in the kitchen making pasta. He asked how my day was. I said fine. I set my purse down on the counter next to his hand, and I watched him stir the pot, and I thought about 6 years. 6 years of him carrying this alone, making terrible choices, sending money to a woman in Phoenix to keep her quiet, flying to Portland to see a daughter he was apparently terrified to tell me about. I thought about Maisie, who didn't choose any of this. I thought about myself, who didn't choose any of this either. I said, "Dinner smells good." He smiled at me over his shoulder. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I waited. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of my life. I moved through my days like an actress, performing a role I had been given without a rehearsal. I ate dinner with Daniel. I went to bed beside him. I answered his texts during the day. I called my mother on Sundays and talked about her garden and Gerald's new woodworking hobby, and I said nothing. I met with the agents twice more. Each time they updated me. The recordings were producing what they needed. The case was building. Daniel had now made formal contact with the fraud unit through his attorney and was in active cooperation proceedings. They told me at the third meeting that they expected to move within 2 weeks. I went home that night and sat in the vegetable garden for a long time. The tomatoes were coming in. I had planted them in April, when I was still a woman who thought she knew what her life was. They didn't know anything had changed. They had just kept growing in the dark, and now here they were. Daniel came outside and sat in the other garden chair. He didn't say anything for a while. We just sat there. Then he said, "Claire, I need to tell you something." I turned and looked at him. He was looking at his hands. He said, "I've done things I'm not able to fix. I know that. I know there are things coming that are going to be very bad. And I'm not asking you to forgive me or to wait for me or to do anything. I just need you to know that you were always the real thing. Everything else I made choices I don't have an explanation for. But you were always the real thing." I sat with that for a long time before I said anything. I said, "I know about Portland, Daniel. I know about Maisie. I know about Carolyn. I know about the case." He went very still. I said, "I've known for a while." He looked at me and I watched something in his face collapse. Not in a violent way. In the way a building settles slowly, definitively, the way things do when they finally stop holding their shape. He said, "How long?" I told him. He nodded. He didn't cry. I didn't either. We sat there in the vegetable garden in the dark, not touching, not moving away, and I thought about all the questions I had and all the answers I might never get to the bottom of. About Maisie, growing up in Portland with a father who flew in and flew out. About the woman in Phoenix who had taken $31,000 to stay quiet about a man who was already crumbling. About Margaret Osley at my mother's wedding, leaning in with a champagne glass like she was offering a refill, pressing a folded photograph into my hand and saying, "Don't tell your husband." I thought about my mother, dancing at her wedding in a bustled dress, not knowing that 40 feet away her daughter was holding a lit match to the life she thought she had. 3 days later, federal agents came to our front door at 7 in the morning. I had been told it was coming. I still wasn't ready for the sound of it, the knock, the voices, Daniel's intake of breath from the bedroom. I had slept in the guest room the past 3 nights. I heard him go to the door. I heard the words. I sat on the edge of the guest bed in the pale morning light, and I listened to my husband of 6 years leave the house. The door closed. I sat there for a while. Then I got up. I made coffee. I called Renata. I called my mother, and I told her most of it, not all of it. She cried. I didn't, not then. I went outside and I checked on the tomatoes. The legal proceedings took months. Daniel's cooperation reduced his exposure significantly. His attorney and the prosecutors worked out terms I was not part of and didn't need to be. Trisha, in Portland, was told the full situation by federal officials. I thought about her receiving that news, and I felt something for her that I didn't have an exact name for. She had been lied to as completely as I had, in different ways, for different reasons. I filed for divorce in November. It was very quiet and very civil. Daniel signed everything without dispute. He asked once, in a text, if there was any version of a future where we might talk again when things had settled. I sat with that text for 3 days before I responded. I told him I didn't know. That was the truth. Gerald and my mother came to stay with me for a week after the paperwork was filed. Gerald fixed the screen door that had been sticking since July. My mother planted bulbs in the vegetable garden for spring. We had dinner together every night and watched television, and didn't talk about it unless I wanted to, and sometimes I wanted to and sometimes I didn't, and both were okay. The pearl necklace stayed in the zippered pocket of my suitcase for a long time. I didn't throw it away. I didn't put it back on. Eventually I moved it to a small dish on my dresser, which is where it still is. I'm not the same woman who stood at my mother's wedding holding a champagne glass, not knowing that a stranger was about to walk up and change everything. I'm quieter now. I pay attention differently. I trust more slowly, which I don't think is a bad thing. Maisie turned 3 in the spring. I know this because Daniel's attorney sent me a letter, a formality related to financial disclosures, and the date was in the header, and I did the math without meaning to. She's 3 years old and she has his nose, and she didn't choose any of this, and I hope, in whatever way is available to a child growing up with a complicated father in Portland, that she's okay. I think about Margaret Osley sometimes. I never thanked her. I never tried to find her. I don't know what her full story was, or what her connection to the case ultimately meant for her. But she pressed that photograph into my hand at a wedding, when she didn't have to. She pointed me toward a thread and trusted me to pull it. I pulled it. I'm still here. And I need to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city below. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, please subscribe to Her Silent Revenge. There's so much more to come. I'll see you in the next one.